Welcome back to the Need for Speed series, where we continue recreating Need for Speed inside of Unity. This is what we got so far, the garage scene. And now what we're gonna do is create these camera transitions. If we go ahead and launch the game and continue to our garage scene, or should I say the awake scene, this is what we get. We get a camera zooming in inside of the vehicle. So let's try and recreate that. Okay, let's get a split view. And first what we saw is the camera transitioning from somewhere in this position, coming over into this position. So to do that, we're obviously going to have to write some code, and there's two ways of doing that. First, we can use a animation curve to curve the animations and curve the rotation to always look at this vehicle. And secondly, we can use a array of transforms, which is what we're going to do. So first things first, we're going to define a starting position somewhere in here. So all we're going to do is create a empty game object. So this game object contains only a position. It has no other components attached to it. So I'm going to give it a color so we know where the starting position is. And now we're going to create a second one of this so we can transition from here all the way over to here. So we're going to duplicate that and we're going to transition in here. Okay, that's all we have to do. And now let's get inside of coding. Okay, I went ahead and created a camera manager script, and now we're going to populate this script with some variables. First thing we're going to need is an array of those transforms that we just made earlier. So we can save them as game objects, or we can save them as a transform variable. We're going to save them as game objects for now, and we're going to call them camera waypoints. Next, we're going to do a fixed update. And before we go any further, we're going to need an indicator of where the camera currently is. So every time we start this scene, we want this camera to be snapped to this position. So if we snap the camera to this position, then we can transition slowly to this position. So let's do that. In the start update, or in the start method, we're gonna snap this camera. Since this camera manager is connected to the actual camera, all we need to do is say transform dot position, and then we can transform obviously our position into any position we want. So we want the very first position of this camera waypoints. The very first position is obviously the camera position indicator at 0. So we're gonna say camera waypoints dot transform dot game object camera waypoints in the index of 0 dot transform dot position. And now the camera will snap from its initial position inside this position. And then as soon as we start, we want the camera to slowly transition from this position into the next position that we want. So we're going to lerp the position. So we're going to say transform dot position is equal to vector3 dot lerp. Now I'm sure you know how lerping works. We have a starting vector, finishing vector, and a time that this transition will take place. So the starting position is obviously transform that position. The end and the ending position is the camera waypoints inside the camera waypoints indicator, this one. And of course, if you want to vary the speed of this transition, you can do this lerp speed as a public variable. Okay, now here is our array. We're going to define it as a two game objects of array. The first array is obviously this starting array. So we're going to drag that and drop it in here. The second one is obviously this one. Drag that in here. And we want to change this camera position to lerp from this 0 to 1. And let's see what happens. Okay, the camera is lerping, but a very, very slow speed. Let's try lerping it back to 0. It's very, very slow. So let's increase that to like 20. Okay, now it's a little bit too fast. Okay, now we got the basics down. If you might have noticed, the camera doesn't look at the vehicle at all the time. So we're going to change that. There is obviously multiple ways to change that, but the one that we're going to use today is we're going to define a starting position where this vehicle will spawn. So what I'm going to do is create another empty game object. I'm going to give it a color. Okay, now this will be our spawning position. This will be the point where the camera will be looking at all the time. So back into our script, we want another game object. And then instead of using this transform.position, what we're going to do is simply use a lookat function. So transform.lookat. And in here, all we have to pass is a position, a transform.position. So we're going to use this spawn position.transform.position. And now the camera should always look at this vehicle. Okay, as we can see, it is working. We can lerp back. We can lerp between these values, and we're going to see that the camera is always looking at this vehicle. Okay, that's all we're going to do in this tutorial. I hope you've liked it. I hope you'll have learned something from it. And if you're wondering why this Golf is in here, it is only as a reference vehicle. This will be changed with the legendary M3 that we have inside Need for Speed. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next tutorials.